Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Revol- Revolutionizing Security with AI-Enhanced SOC. I am Shilpa Sharma, and I will be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Also, admissions are currently open. For further details about our courses, please visit our website www.eccu.edu. Our speaker for today's session, Randy Thomas. Randy is responsible for the SOC, Security Product Development, which includes detection as code, DFIR, incident command, vulnerability management, threat intelligence driven security, operations, threat hunting, and offensive security at Syntex, a leading managed cloud provider. Randy has over 21 years of experience in enterprise cybersecurity in various environments, including the US military and intelligence for commercial e-com, retail, and MSP, MSSP markets. He leverages his combined 28 plus years of enterprise IT experience and 18 years of experience in DevOps, DevSecOps, SOC, security engineering, and software development to deliver high quality security products and solutions. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Randy.
Thank you, Shilpa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our discussion today. So, artificial intelligence, a lot of buzzwords, right? So how do you actually employ it? How do you use it? What can it do for you? Where can it take you? And then, how do you get there? That's always the difficult part. So this talk today, we're looking more at execution. So how do you actually do it? How do you put it into your program development for your SOC, for your security environment, whatever that may be, versus this is not really an engineering discussion. I enjoy those as well. But as is often the case in our industry, my favorite example is when you go to look for how do you stop ransomware. If you've looked for that, all of the things you see are the same basic responses. They don't actually tell you need to do the first 6 CIS security controls. You need to stop X, Y, and Z type of lateral movement. You can't make your domain controllers that available, things like that, right? So we'll get more into the how and the how to make it work, but it is important to know where you can get based upon your relative maturity in your organization. So definitely from a program management and from a leadership philosophy standpoint, very much, you view things as, I view things as first principles, try to distill it down to its basic problems and how to actually solve it, regardless of what your particular resources are. It varies. I've had environments where I had tens of millions of dollars, and I've had environments where I've had tens of hundreds and thousands of dollars. So you have to always figure out your environment that you're working in and try to see where you're at from a maturity standpoint to try to get to a future better outcome. So things that are good to help build a foundational understanding for where you are from a security operations perspective. Things like doing a SOC capability maturity model, SOC CMM audit is a fantastic way to get a good idea for where you are. It's a very detailed self-audit you can do. It's freely available. Highly recommended just to see where you are. You can't get there if you can't measure where you are and how you advance. So very much every organization is at a relative level of maturity, which we'll talk more about here in a bit. But the main thing to understand is you need to be able to measure all of these pieces. So what can you get out of artificial intelligence, AI? The way I like to look at AI as a tool set is it's much more advanced analytics. It's much more than that, but we've had analytics for decades with SIMs. With our SIM tools and with all of our SOAR pieces and all of that, we've had that. A lot of it was Boolean algebra and regex and other such work we would bolt scripting onto, right? The AI approach now gives us a lot more opportunity to actually do a lot of enrichment and contextual analysis, which if you're in the operations space, it's very important to build context, right? So areas you can take it to. So for me, if you've watched any of my prior webinars, I'm very big on doing a threat-based approach to everything. Everyone has limited resources, time, money, personnel, all of those pieces. So being able to focus them on your crown jewels, the most important things in your environment, it gives you the best approach. That way you can build out a plan to be responsive and react appropriately. So it's very important in our operations environment to be able to respond. We can't plan for everything. In fact, everything is chaos. If you're in a security operations center, everybody comes to you and everything is on fire, right? So being able to do things to help you do that and handle the interactions and build that context. Well, you know, here's the event. We've enriched it with, here's the IOCs we found for it. Here are the threat actors operating in your particular market segment, your NAICS codes, you know, your retail, hospitality, and, you know, here are the bad guys, right? Here's how you should focus on their TTPs, their tools, techniques, and procedures. So that gives you really a leg up in being able to respond versus just react, because we want to do everything we can to stop chaos, because that's our job, right? We help protect and manage the risk of our organizations. We use tech as a tool. We're not tech. So anything, you know, along those lines, in more mature organizations, they have typically a form or a version of an ITSM, a problem management workflow and environment. So, you know, not only is it nice to get your SIM events enriched, but it's nice to be able to have bi-directional. You can have your ServiceNow instance updated with ticketed information. You can pull that in, you can update it. Your analysts can work in that environment. So they're working in the SIM versus having to work in 2-3 different tools. Being able to build that context, basically, with the nice thing with AI is you can actually now build a almost surrogate additional analyst out of, you know, the bot to help it build all the context. You know, a common problem the SOCs will see are, well, there is this Windows event. Here's the Windows event. Here's the code for what the event is. Pull that in and enrich it. Here's what the code actually means. You know, it's there in seconds, and it helps really get you to the endpoint of trying to define, is it just a security event or is it a security incident, right? So it's all about making those decisions and doing it with that enhanced context. The other piece that helps immensely on the AI side, so in all of this conversation, so we have been using at Syntax for about 15 months, AI tools to do the very things we're talking about today. It's all getting to where my team is at and where we are with capability delivery. It's using compound goals, and then you have your objectives, you have your key results. Strategically, you plan a route to get here. You don't get to this point by accident. You have to understand where you are from a relative maturity standpoint. So the point of all of this is scalability. You want consistency, and you want to be able to give good quality responses rapidly. You want to lower that window for mean time to detect, mean time to respond, and resolve. right? So an issue always is alert fatigue. It's been the case since forever when there have been IT and cyber op centers. You can't get away from it. One of the nice things about the AI piece, and it couples with the proactive threat detection and doing crown jewel approach versus classical enterprise vulnerability management, EVM, is you can start to overlay, here's the threat landscape, here are the IOCs, here are the TTPs, and that particular CVSS score for VMware tools is low. However, I'm a hosting provider and I understand how my systems and my environment operates. So it's now a higher score based upon the threat and the context of where I'm at, right? That gets you out of just being a traditional EVM based, we just patch things. So lets you mature more, get you closer to that walk and run phase of maturity. So another side benefit is you can get better analytics. Analytics, KPIs and the like, those are interesting concepts. Typically, managers tend to use them incorrectly, right? So being able to do some data science approach to what is possible from a analytics standpoint is really good, because what you're trying to do is to see how effective am I and what are my gaps, and how much am I being effective. So these are all areas that help you get to a better level of maturity. Most organizations, there are versions of this, right? So you have to think about, well, proactive threat detection sounds amazing, but it's going to be a hard slog in 3 years to get there. That's a reality of most places, whether you're an MSSP, an MSP, or just you are one environment and you are responsible for your Fortune 500, Fortune 50 environment or smaller, right? You always have a version of this challenge. So relative maturity. So in DevOps, DevSecOps, crawl, walk, run, and fly, right? You never fly, and most everybody's crawling and walking, and what's to the left of a crawl is burping. You don't know what you're doing. You have a lot of challenges. You're in the precursor stage, so you may be in the burp stage or the crawl, right? Maybe the walk in parts. So how can you effectively use AI? What are some opportunities? So typically, with a low level of maturity, you're missing process definitions. You don't have a consistent way to respond. It's not only do you have a good workflow, do you have a good set of tasks and diagrams to say, here's how you actually go through and deal with, here's the 6 phases of incident response. We have everything Verus mapped. That's great. But do all of your analysts know how to do that? That's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. So working on that. Inadequate monitoring and detection. Are you monitoring your crown jewels? Never mind, you're getting a bunch of Active Directory logs, you're getting a bunch of IDPS and firewall logs. That's great. It's nice. Are you actually, do you know what your crown jewels are? And you should figure that out, right? Crown jewels analysis, I'll probably mention that a dozen more times today. You need to understand what's important. This is so what, right? Because you're there defending an organization that is in business to do something. What are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect the order management system, their OMS for econ? Or are you trying to protect their credit card database, their CDB? Yes. Or what are you having to deal with? So you have, IDAM, so your Active Directory, your Azure AD, your AAD, and then whatever else on top of that. Your ZTNA, maybe possibly some other pieces along that line. What are important? Go do, if you don't have a list of crown jewels, spend 3 hours in a working session with the good enough appropriate people to say, hey, here's what we identify right now as what's important. We can codify this, we can build on it later. You can always add to it. But a lot of places go around just like everything's important. Well, no, it's not. It's actually not. You do crisis management, and then more esoteric things like business continuity planning. Not everything is important. You need to distill it down to its simplest elements and understand what you need to do. And then you go back and say, well, here's where I have gaps in my monitoring and detection. These are real issues. Pragmatically take it as an approach. You always have to, and it gets brought up often enough, not just by myself in cybersecurity conversations, but the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. Colonel Boyd, USAF, did an amazing job putting that together for dogfighting and air combat. It also works in a lot of other areas, including cyber operations. So being able to iterate is very important, and do it rapidly and consistently is key. What is your tech stack, right? Do you have a SIM? Do you have SIMs? I've been at places where I had 4 with terrible coverage. So seen it all. You need to be able to, this is not an engineering conversation, but you need to figure out your data pipeline, right? You need to be able to understand how to do feature engineering to get that to a good point. Just in general, for AI, you need to have feature generation for your AI ML pieces. What models and what learning practices can you use? What makes sense? Then you have to do model training and validation. What makes sense from that standpoint? Threat intelligence tends to be a very common lack in most organizations. You may have a TIP, threat intel platform, basically a SIM for threat intel data. Data is the key. You have to turn it into information. So that's a huge. So threat intelligence, the derivative is information. So you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and more on threat intelligence data feeds, but until you've contextualized and normalized and put that information into a format that can actually help, it's noise, right? Go back to the prior couple of slides. We're talking about event saturation. Too many bits of information coming in, too many bits of data, really. Being able to distill that down into threat intelligence information is huge. That helps you focus your limited resources. Another issue in immature teams is communication and collaboration. Let's just say inside your SOC. If you have a global SOC, like I do, English is a first, second, third language, even for myself sometimes. You always have to work on building and keeping rapport. We're all people, we all have that need to build that connection, right? So that's a huge thing. These numbers are not order of importance, they're just order of being put in the list. I would say this is probably the most important one. Doesn't matter how good your processes are in your monitoring and detection. If you are broke as an organization, you're not a team, you're just a collection of misfits. That's a challenge. So, on the tail end of doing the 6 steps of incident response, you have your AAR, your after action reporting, your after action report. What happened? What did we learn? Iterative, right? What can we do better? How can we not let this happen again this way? How can we plan to build a better response. So, you know, there's a lot of things you can do. It's not just throwing tech at the problem and checking boxes. A lot of this is just work. It's a slog. It's not sexy. Pardon the idiom, but it's wearing overalls and it looks like work, and it is. It's not something you can put on a sales slide for next quarter or in the EBR or the QDR. So you have to go in and you have to build this foundation as an organization if you want to actually get the AI part to work, and then you want to make it work for you. So well, we can go forward and talk more about that. So there's a lot of areas. I've got 10, I would say, major ones. We'll talk through the first 4, which I think are the most important. So data collection and normalization, right? So I have crown jewels in here again. CJA, crown jewels analysis. What matters, right? It's about the so what. We all know the why. We're in business to stay in business, make money, do whatever we need to do if we're a governmental or an NGO, things like that. We get that. So what matters? Figure out what those pieces are. It cannot overstate how important that is. That sets the tone of everything you do as an organization. Even if if you find yourself in a leadership, whether it's technical or managerial leadership position inside of a SOC that's not new, right? A lot of brownfield, as we like to say, not greenfield. You still need to understand that, and I probably would say most don't know what that is. They would have some ideas if you just had a conversation, but it's not written down. It's not in your analytics that your SIM uses for your alerting structure, much less anything more advanced and esoteric. I mean, you can take your data collection, normalization, and all the data management that goes with that, data provenance, data pedigree. You can take that to serious levels, and you can use graph math to see what's normal and what's abnormal, right? There's a lot of areas you can go in with just number 1. You can spend a lot of time there, but what you're looking for as a ops leader is you want to be able to tune, again, your relative maturity. Doesn't do any good to have very nice esoteric, TTP threat overlaying if you're failing to just be able to do basics and incident response. What's my escalation matrix? How do I respond and bill out the ITSM incident? Because now a security incident means it's an ITSM incident, right? So how do I fill that out? So there's a lot of pieces from a leadership standpoint. When you're putting together your OKRs, your objectives and key results, let's just say on a quarterly, annual basis, here's where I want to be strategically as I head towards being an AI SOC. It used to be, we call it live SOC, which means we're proactive, we're going out and doing things in advance, we're seeing the changes, and we're able to change our queries and our permutations of how we go and investigate. So it's very, if you don't have the good foundational pieces, I know it's boring and it is work, a lot of work, but you need to be able to balance building out your foundational pieces, but you can start to add in, well, we're missing logs from this particular IAM solution, or we don't have good coverage on this particular IDPS to a third-party supplier, things like that. Get the quick wins, right? And things that take longer, take longer. Always try to be improving, but recognize things they take time, and they have their own paths to success and implementation. So if you have an environment of any size, so data standardization, so normalization is important. If you've done any amount of log ingestion and analysis, you know that the consistency is the inconsistency. So you need to be able to make it consistent as possible. Get your epochs down, the same time zones, preferably Zulu, UTC. That would be good. Again, foundational pieces. A lot of places don't have this. It's just reality. So you can talk about doing all the cool things, but until you do the uncool things, the cool things are just, they're a distraction. And the cool things are really cool. So do yourself a favor and sort out in the first year, 18 months, as much of this as you can. So an area you can get into as well, not to name products, from an EDR standpoint, endpoint detect and respond, but as good as they are, there are always limitations. And we'll talk about Windows because that's de facto for desktop and for a good portion of your server hosting environment, in addition to Linux, various flavors. So there's a lot of gaps in content that exist, and there's limitations. There's limitations in what Microsoft exposes to the kernel, right? That causes challenges. Look at the piping disaster that was the global CrowdStrike Falcon outage. It was many things, including trying to deal with the fact that there was limitations in that kernel. Not just not good QA. So there's a lot of challenges on the detect and response side. So we can always go and deal with edge cases, emerging threats. As you get more advanced, the more of that you can do. If you have any hands-on experience with any SIEM, default rules are horrible. GitHub default rules for Sentinel, to pick on that one, it's not a Sentinel problem. It's out of the box. Not good. So you have to build your own detection rules. Like, those rules are atrocious. They're a starting point. They're also a point where you die. So be very careful, in areas like that. So it just, you have to take kind of more of a bigger picture view of what's actually going on, what's happening, what you're seeing, and try to figure out what you're not seeing. That ties back into number one. So prioritization. So this gets into SIEM tuning, right? So there are a lot of issues. Some of my favorites are guard duty for AWS. Extremely noisy. Tends to be extremely low value in the event data, the alert data that you get. Just like any other IDPS, right? If you don't get it, you have problems. If you do get it, you have other problems. So, so your content development, you can definitely take and use an AI bot to help in classification, to help in grouping. When you have 24 alerts of a similar type, hey, this is here is this alert, here's a summary, in which to the humans in the ops team, we should be looking at that and saying, we should probably tune that out. It's probably not useful. There's a lot of that. So you should be able to get down from tens of millions of alerts. Here's what you should be looking for, right? I can get from tens of millions of alerts to a couple of dozen that actually matter. Maybe a couple of dozen, maybe 3 or 4. There's a metric and there's an understanding in security ops where if you have thousands and millions of events, you have a very few actual incidents. Following the 6-step incident model, right? Look at your Varus do your various mappings for, is it malware, or is it physical, is it or environmental, or is it one of these other pieces, right? So you should be able to map it back and say, well, I don't really have many incidents. You should be able to get to that point where you don't have alert fatigue, because most of that gets tuned. And that takes, year and a half through multiple iterations of maturity. As you're planning this out from a program standpoint, right? You have a lot of checkpoints you need to reach from a relative maturity standpoint, and everything you're trying to do compound goals. Like to get all of these things in place to build a more mature SOC environment, it's all about compound goals. So things I did 2 years ago should have a corollary effect in relation to things I'm doing in 6 months from now. If you're doing it right, if you're trying to run a balance of, I need to get to this point, but I need to actually take a step back and make sure I'm actually solving the here and now challenges, which oftentimes there's correlation, and it's like, yeah, if I adjust this will help in the other area. So definitely feedback loops are important. The feedback loop and the whole OODA concept really gets into your intra-team communication. So just the SOC, never mind the other infrastructure groups, which you could have many depending on your organization, you have to work with. It's very important to be iteratively successful in improving. We're trying to move the bar and push it up, right? Trying to make it harder to have the easy problems get through and we not get notified of it, or we can't fix it. That's a constant thing, and that really needs to be part of the culture. Is let's always improve, and let's have a conversation. Whether it's a global team doing, as the sun moves, handovers for incidents. That's important, right? Also, it's, I'm seeing, A, B, and C. I don't understand how it affects things. So these are tuning issues. And when you have AI tools, you can take the normal tuning issues and then you can go and say, well, here's other issues that I can address. I can bring in this virus total data. I can bring in I can take the current threat feeds from my TIP, my threat intel platform. I can say, this could be this. And what you do is you put all that information in front of your analyst that's trying to make a determination. Is this a security event? Is it a security incident? And, is it a true positive, false positive? What is it? There's 9 different categories that could be. So what is it? What's going on? So this is a constant process you can actually give your human analysts and AI analysts that is helping them do it better and faster and more consistent. And this has been one of those things that I really have been excited about, what we've been able to do at Syntax. Automation and orchestration, that SOAR acronym, marketing term, right? Back in the mid 2000s, it was what the SIM did. Fast forward now, it's something you need to add to your SIM. So something you need to add to your SIM is definitely the AI learning component, that workspace, if you will. So there's kind of a hand in glove process here of when you can get an idea and an understanding of your automation needs, you're actually understanding what your operational needs are better, and you're iterating through that. And then you will see, and there's a natural progression, especially if you do a DevSecOps approach, do a 2-week sprint. Hey, here's what we did, here's what we're doing, here's what's potentially in the future, and then here's how we get through it. You know, here's our progress, you know, from a content development standpoint, because it's all about content development from security operations. You know, you can get deeper into pieces with automation and the orchestration, because you can say, well, you know, 4 sprints ago, we were just doing this one small virus total piece. You know, now we're doing some polymorphism, and, you know, when we see this, we're going to send out a query, and the query is going to go through, it's going to shell into this endpoint, and it's going to run these SAP commands, and it's going to get some output, and it's going to pivot, and it's going to go get these commands based upon whatever's happening in the environment. So that's where you can start to take, you know, the simple, what we had is very simple SIM analytics and automations for, you know, decades. We can now take and say, oh, well, the analytics are amazing now, because we can go and we can contextually say, I need to go here now. Well, now I need to go there. And you can pull that in, and you can go places that SOC couldn't go at scale before. Could we do it? Yes. But if you've done hunt work, it's incredibly intensive, it's time intensive, it's resource intensive, it's a luxury in a lot of cases. It's necessary, so it's always a balance of how to actually try and do it, right? You know, and then, you know, areas kind of getting into the other 6 that I have, you know. So when you're doing the automations and you're doing your prioritizations, well, what's your threat intelligence? What's it telling you? You know, what are the current TTPs? You know, you don't care if it's FIN8 or APT 27. What you care about are, this is how they act now. Your campaigns, they're going on in my market segment, my NACS code. Right? Okay, well, what was happening 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 18 months ago? Because oldies are goodies, right? That's ironically how ransomware works. It uses old, very old exploits, because it's the tyranny of the default, right? This is the default way Windows is, and it's default insecure. So, yeah, there's all these pieces you have to consider from a program standpoint, and how to build in the AI approach. But you can do some pretty incredible things. You know, it's just a perfect example is we went from doing an Intel dossier on a customer from about 5 hours, I'd say, plus or minus a couple hours, long multi-step process. You know, go here. You know, it's everything from your NACS codes to your board of directors, all of your recent M&A, your mergers and acquisitions, to, well, these are your BGP4 routes, right? Here's your peers. Here's all your certs, your TLS certs, and all those pieces. We went from hours manually to minutes, where it's ran manual. It's ran by one of our bots. What that does is that lets us put together well, this customer over here, they're manufacturing in this particular manufacturing niche, right? So, and here's how they have to deal with their threats, right? Here's how we help them, versus the other one is retail, and they're brick and mortar. They're not e-com. Well, here's the threats. Here are the pieces. Here's how we actually handle that. Here's where we best defend them. Here's where we go into our DevSecOps cycle, and here's where we build content. So their use cases, their analytics, whether they're AI or traditional, you know, Boolean and regex, if you will, versus more contextual and having an almost analyst, you know, bot crawl through and pull in other information. So there's a lot you can do with it. You know, and even some of the lower end threshold, if you will, from an AI complexity standpoint that works really well is, get an SPN, get a service account into your AAD, your Azure Active Directory, or the hybrid, whatever you have, and be able to pop user accounts, right? If you build these workflows, you have these use cases, and the playbook says to pop the account, pop the MFA, you can in seconds to very few minutes deal with issues that can cause you nightmares if you don't. And those are actually simpler AI enriched automations. So lots of pieces and parts there. Just to kind of wrap things up a little bit here. So challenges, there are always lots, right? From a program management and leadership standpoint, there's always a relative level of immaturity and maturity in your particular SOC. So it can always be improved, right? So what do you do? So strong foundations, most definitely with AI adoption is super important. And it's also incredibly important as well if you don't adopt AI. That the same things help in the same areas. Because you need to have overarching goals. You can't solve any of your problems with any one tool. You can't just check a box and say, I'm good. It's work. So challenges always exist, regardless of your maturity. Data quality, huge. So, data normalization, are you getting the right bits of data? Are you getting the right alerts? Are you getting the right data feeds, the right intelligence data feeds? Data management's huge. As you get more advanced and more mature, particularly data provenance and pedigree. What's that, Randy? It's a great question. Do you know where the data came from and how it got to you? Like from a comprehensive standpoint, like the data lifecycle. So it started from a host over here that went to a domain controller, that went to a syslog reflector, to a heavy forwarder, to your Splunk environment, for instance. Know what that is. Know where there could be problems and gaps there. Is the reflector or the reflectors modifying timestamps of the epoch, right? When did the alert actually happen? Things like that. Those if you're not cognizant of them, they will bite you in the worst ways. Crown jewels, always important, and you have to integrate with your environment. You can't come in with, here's my AI SOC, my SIM, my XDR platform, and it doesn't work with anything, right? You have to tailor your approach, tailor your process, tailor your framework, tailor your tech to your environment. And lastly, you can't not have unskilled people building out your content, whether it's traditional detection, content engineering, or AI-based workflows and tools. So with that being said, Shilpa, over to you.
Thank you, Randy, for your insightful presentation. Your expertise and engaging delivery were greatly appreciated by our attendees. If you are interested to learn more about our program, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. If you would like to learn more, please select yes, and we will schedule a call to provide you with more information. So Randy, shall we start with the Q&A?
Absolutely.
Okay. So our first question to you is, how can I detect that an antivirus or anti-malware ransomwares like Kaspersky systems from this Russian are using inside loops to get into your network to do the damage?
So a big challenge with whatever your EDR platform is getting good instrumentation in it, and two, having an effective API in it. Those are both challenges. So let's take the API out of the consideration to start with. So you need to be able to have triggers, or be able to have good triggers to look for things such as the evasion, as in, for the lateral movement. So some EDRs out of the box have that quite well, like Falcon or CrowdStrike. Others don't, and they have versions somewhere in the middle, right? They have inconsistency. So where the challenge tends to be as you build up your tooling and your engineering infrastructure to support your operations is you run into challenges with your APIs, because you need to have bidirectional API access, and you need to have the appropriate level of functionality, which it can be a challenge. A perfect example of where it's a challenge is Cisco AMP, now called Cisco Secure Endpoint, CSE. Its API has issues. Its detections have some issues. So there's gaps there. It's very tough, and it's very vendor dependent, specifically the EDR vendors. SIM vendors, whether it's Splunk or Sentinel or Elastic, to pick the top three, basically, can handle that. So it's a lot of that's baked into the EDR platform, or you're going to have problems. So, next question.
Thank you, Randy, for answering that question. Our next question to you is there some examples from AI-driven tools to identify incoming threats?
Yeah. So the approach we took at Syntax was our global SOC. We developed, we call it our Nexus bot. And so what it does is it goes out and it leverages our tip. We have multiple data intel feeds coming into it, and it goes, it looks at our data lake inside of Splunk from an MSSP perspective, so that concatenates and pulls in everything. And it looks across what's going on, and it says, well, these are the things happening, and this customer is retail, this customer is in manufacturing, this customer is manufacturing in petrochemicals. These are the things that should pop up, both from an alerting context and also from a contextual input into an event that could become incidents. So you can definitely do that. Highly recommend it. It's definitely a more advanced level of SOC maturity, but it helps because anytime you can tie the threat into what's going on with operations, you build the context, you build the focus, you can actually use your resources better. So, good question.
Thank you, Randy, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, how can I be alerted when the attack or attacks break through all defending systems and avoid that this attack or attacks are being avoided? At this point, can I inject AI, for example?
Well, so you can definitely inject AI into it. So going back to my, the top 4 areas to focus on to fill in gaps and foundational, the number 1 is data sources, right? So in your attack scenario, you should have defined your crown jewels well enough to kind of cover the here are the spots they could get to. That, and then you follow that up with logging information, alerts and other automations from those systems or subsystems, and you get those into your SIM. And then you can most certainly take and build some contextualization out of that. And the best way to build the contextualization these days is to use an AI bot to do it. Just think of it as super analytics, where you're way past doing a Boolean algebra to get to your conclusions. So it gets into having the appropriate level of visibility in your environment as a starting point. Are there gaps? There usually are. So yeah, it's just being able to understand what you have and articulate that well enough in the AI bot content development to be able to do that. But you can most certainly do that.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question to you is, given the various tools and methodologies used for SOC auditing and assessment, are there other types of staff members you would recommend that are not technical?
So good question. So I like to have, I call it a luxury almost. I like to have an ops center with a very diverse background wherever possible. So not everyone, so not every threat hunter, not every analyst comes from an IT background. It's good to have that, but give me somebody that was in foreign affairs, working for the State Department. Give me somebody that has an accounting background. A big part of what we have to deal with in cybersecurity ops is invoice fraud, W-2 fraud if you're in the US for your taxes. It's good to have those types of skills. You still need to be able to understand the IT side, right? Because those are the tools and the techniques and the procedures often, or partly, that the bad guys use. So no, I think it's a great blend. I know it's difficult. A lot of the folks I've mentored over the years and taught in DFIR courses, they come from different backgrounds. I think it's cool. It's tough if you don't have the IT background, because you have to add that part in. But yeah, good question.
Thank you, Randy, for answering that question. We'll take last two questions for the day. Our next question to you is, I would like to know how to start learning about SOC, a hand-on course. I have hand-on experiences in penetration testing skill.
Okay. So pen test background, so OffSec, that's cool. So in my opinion, typically some of the best defenders, we know how to break it and tear it all down. So what you have to be able to do is contextually. So, here's how I can compromise these systems. So you have to put on the other, how would I stop myself from compromising these systems, right? So that's a key part of it. And then you have to understand the kind of the ops mindset. It's a bit different, but I think the better mindsets tend to have the OffSec piece, whether they started in OffSec or they got into OffSec, offensive security. So definitely can work with it, but security operations is all about risk management, risk mitigation, reporting. So you have to kind of approach it from that standpoint. So there's a bit of a mind shift change, but also it's a good challenge, I think, if you're a good red team type of person. So and they make better defenders typically.
Thank you for answering that question. Our last question to you is, what are the AI tools?
Lots of options, right? So definitely this was not an engineering conversation, but so for instance, so what we leverage is, we leverage Azure, we have Azure workloads where we have our own uh, learning language model, or LLM, plural actually. So we train them for different things. We train one for threat intelligence, one for security operations, et cetera, et cetera. So whatever you use, would highly recommend you host and use your own LLM. Don't use an out-of-the-box open commercial. I'd say open in the terms that it's publicly accessible. What you don't want to happen is you don't want to happen to what was to Samsung like 9 months ago, where all their corporate secrets, ended up in a publicly available chat LLM. So definitely have some firewalling there. It's good. We're using the Azure, and that was what we had available to us, and it was easy and it works well. And we have flexibility in that to use different base LLMs to do derivative learning against training, if you will. So yeah, I mean, many companies have Azure environments. That's why Microsoft has the nice, big, expensive buildings around the world.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you again to our wonderful speaker for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you, Randy. Before we conclude the webinar, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Yeah, thank you everybody for their time. I enjoyed it. Again, Shilpa, these are great. Appreciate the questions. I think it was good, and topics like this are interesting, and they're often misunderstood. So thanks for the opportunity to discuss, and I always learn when I do these. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Randy, for the message to our audience.